CYSUR, very warm welcome from Cathy and myself to this recording of a summary in respect of the Child Practice Review. Thank you. We will go on to look at the 7-minute briefing slide, which we think is an excellent summary and crystallises the main themes. In respect of the background, there are two subjects of this review, Child X and Child Y, both looked after under orders by the local authority and placed for time periods with foster carer adult SED with an overlapping period of 3 months. We have two separate timelines covering an accumulative period of over 3 years, and this provided us with a further insight. Child Y reported a recent sexual assault against him by adult SED, in respect of which adult SED was found guilty of sexual assault and sexual assault by a person in a position of trust. Later, Child X reported a historic sexual assault against him by adult SED, of which adult SED was found to be not guilty. In the report, the words report and statements have been used to describe these reports by both Child X and Child Y. In respect of the context, Cathy and myself found that the added vulnerability of the child looked after was a theme, both in terms of lived experiences and profile of care and support needs, and also in respect of the increased barriers to disclosure. This vulnerability was exacerbated by the placements of other children, young people with extremely complex care and support needs. In respect of Child X and the earlier timeline, we noted a resource-led rather than a needs-led placement planning and service delivery approach, what Rose and Cleaver referred to as a conveyor belt approach, with clear use of exemptions to reconcile some of the placements made. We note that the duty to report a child at risk, where there is a reasonable cause to suspect, applies equally to children looked after in the same way as it does to a child in the general public. We see at page 15 in the review report a continuum of concerns and allegations that did not trigger a consideration of the thresholds of continuing suitability to foster, child protection, nor of a person in a position of trust. We note that practitioner values an assumption of safety can be a barrier to identifying and responding to potential harm. In respect of Child X, there was an element of source criticism, a perceived assumption that Child X had not always been truthful when placed at home. We found that this view was pervasive and led to the development of a negative narrative in respect of Child X, in direct contrast to the positive narrative in respect of foster carer adult SED. In respect of the child's voice, and Cathy will go on to talk about this in greater detail a little later, we are both delighted that Child X and Child Y have contributed to the review process so eloquently, and that this is reflected in the review reports itself and in the recommendations. In respect of the foster carer role, foster carer Z was an experienced, highly regarded foster carer, approved as suitable to foster in 2008 with 27 placements made. We heard at the learning event that he was held in awe and a model foster carer. There appeared to be a blurring of the boundaries in respect of his role and remit, accountability and exercise of delegated authority, with foster carer adult SED attaining a position of perceived and actual control. This may have proved to be an additional barrier in the identification and response to potential harm. There are concerns that the annual reviews of continuing suitability were not fully informed by a consideration of the placements made, the care and support needs of the children, young people in placements, the use of exemptions, and expressed individual or accumulative concerns, including concerns of ongoing suitability of a person in a position of trust. The local authority has already implemented changes to the way it presents reviews of suitability to the fostering panel, introducing a more rigorous and independent elements to the review process. Supervision of both foster carer and practitioner were also highlighted and reflected in the recommendations. In terms of identified good practice, it's important to note that the independent reviewing officer has a critical role. It's also important to note that the looked after child review process is not a substitute for child protection processes and procedures. The focus is different and does not always include a fully multi-agency consideration of risk assessments and safety planning. The local authority, in another example of good practice, implemented learning very early on in respect of the IRO role, as we see at page 13 of the report, by consolidating quality assurance of practice and regulatory compliance in respect of statutory visits, endorsements of care plans, significant changes, and failure to implement agreed decisions. Also by introducing a practice development, introducing a requirement for the IRO to meet with a child, young person at the end of a placement. We will look at improving systems and practice in the recommendation section later. And Kathy will now have a look at the young person's perspective. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Non. Non and I would take every opportunity just to reference the contribution of Child X and Child Y to this review, and we're extremely grateful for that. We were privileged to meet two young people who should be very proud of their achievements in recent time, and they are an absolute credit to themselves. So we're incredibly grateful. Just to say, in terms of Child X and Child Y, it will be clear from the review that Child X and Child Y both had very different resilience factors and also protective factors, and that comes out within the review. From Child X's perspective, you will see that there was a massive emphasis in terms of the importance of a child being listened to. That came across very strongly from Child X. I won't go through all the bullet points, but you can see that is a very strong message that Child X wanted to get across as part of this review. Particularly in terms of a child being believed and this narrative that had been kind of created around Child X. Non has already alluded to the fact that there was some suggestion that Child X had not been completely honest at times, and this narrative sort of followed Child X, and they found that quite frustrating. Child X did appreciate the pre-trial police support and would have valued that after the trial. He did feel that perhaps that was lacking in the subsequent months after that trial period. But when we asked Child X, what is the overwhelming message and learning from their experience, and as you can see, it really is about professionals and adults listening to a young person, listening, walking the walk and talking the talk, actually engaging with the child and listening to them, and less emphasis on the narrative of the adults in their lives. That was quite clear. It was pleasing to see that Child X had really made a conscious effort to actually make some changes in relation to this, and is engaging really well with the local authority in terms of getting a young person's voice heard. And you can see there are a couple of sort of innovative kind of social media opportunities.
Yeah, really practical suggestions, which are really helpful, aren't they? Which mirror.
Very helpful.
Yes.
And was again advocating that these are used. So that was really good to see, that they were using their experience to really make a change. So that was the overwhelming sort of message from Child X, is that a child needs to be listened to, and really listened to, that none of these tokenistic sort of conversations, real conversations that make a difference.
And what was very, very clear, I think, that both Child X and Child Y wanted to go on, didn't they, to improve outcomes for other children looked after.
Very much so. In terms of Child Y, again, as we've said, there were some differences in terms of their resilience factors. Child Y had some really excellent relationships with practitioners and had a very sort of significant friendship group who supported him. And again, those relationships proved to be really key in this incident because Child Y was able to express their experiences to their peers who encouraged Child Y to make a disclosure, and they supported him to do that. And when Child Y made that disclosure to practitioners within a learning environment, they were very well supported, and all the right mechanisms were put in place to respond to that disclosure in a very timely way. And they were very grateful for the support that they received from all of those that network of people that Child Y had around them at that time, and express what a difference that made to them. Again, one of the overwhelming, I just want to say, one of the overwhelming messages again from Child Y was that sense of betrayal from the foster carer, a real sense of betrayal. And as you can see there, that quote is quite significant, where he said that no one saw this coming. Everyone trusted him, didn't they?
Yeah.
So that was quite stark.
We found that to be a central theme, didn't we, Kathy, both with the young people and also in the learning events, which I think is the next slide. We were very, very fortunate in respect to the learning events. We had very, very good representation, and also practitioners were very, very candid, very, very reflective and very supportive, both of Child X and Child Y and of one another. And this sense of betrayal was palpable in the session, and it's become a central theme, hasn't it, Kathy?
Yes, it really was. It really was.
And I think we made the point at the learning events, of course, that, you know, looking back from a known outcome is a very privileged vantage point, and that we do need to be mindful of the impact on practitioners. When we're looking back from that privileged vantage point, we very often underestimate the challenges facing practitioners in real time, and also overestimate their capacity to have done something differently. But the learning from the learning events, obviously from practitioners and the young people, have proved to be absolutely critical in fully informing the review. And we'll go on to the next slide, which looks at the practice and organisational learning. And this one slide mirrors the themes in respect of the themes highlighted in the reports, and also, of course, reflected in the recommendations. We touched upon the vulnerability of a child looked after, that double disadvantage, and also the potency of the negative narrative in respect of Child X and the corresponding positive narrative in respect of foster carer Z, which obviously has implications for the supervision and monitoring of foster carers, and that very important relationship with the supervising social worker and the need to display professional curiosity when supervising. And again, young person's wishes and feelings, the lived experiences, that to look at things through the young person's prism is absolutely essential in respect of assessing and understanding their experiences and, of course, influencing their outcomes. In respect of placement planning and matching, that was a key theme. There was, in respect of Child X, more of a reactive approach, mirroring, of course, the wider resource difficulties and the challenges, but also in respect of the need for risk assessments, the need for very clear understanding of the child, young person's care and support needs, and also, of course, in respect of those other children, young people in placements, in respect of their own care and support needs, including the need, if appropriate, for risk assessments, and clearly the need at all times for updating the safe care plans. We've highlighted the role of the IRO, and as we highlighted the good practice of early implementation of those key developments. In respect of foster carer suitability and ongoing suitability, we concluded that the assessment of ongoing suitability is as important, if not more important, than the initial assessments of foster carer suitability, and needs to be fully informed by a consideration of all of the placements made, of the use of exemptions, of the collation of any concerns, complaints or allegations, not viewing them in a vacuum, but presenting them to the panel in respect of an overview. The fostering panel will not know what it doesn't know. So there does need to be a very rigorous quality assurance mechanism prior to presentation at the panel. And we were pleased, weren't we, Cathy, that there again had been example of good practice in that the local authority had implemented changes by introducing an independent element to those reviews of suitability, and by ensuring that there was a robust and rigorous annual review process in place. In terms of thresholds, Cathy, I think we found that thresholds were a constant theme, whether that was a threshold of suitability to foster, continuing suitability, implementation or consideration of child protection thresholds, and also, of course, in respect of persons in a position of trust and what is expected of them. And we clearly highlighted that the concerns, complaints, allegation continuum is a fluid one. So clearly that highlights the need for a complete overview. And at times it wasn't clear whether any one person or whether any one place held all the information about the accumulative incidents that were taking place in the placements. And I think this theme of a person in a position of trust links very well, doesn't it, Cathy, to the betrayal?
Very much so, yes. And again, as Non has mentioned, in terms of the learning event, you know, this person was in a position of trust, not only to the children, the young people that they were caring for, but actually that position of trust within their whole network of peers, and that position of trust and respect. And how that position of trust and respect had been totally betrayed by everyone. It was a clear theme throughout the learning, and this person was held in very high regard. Again, not only by the young people that were living with him, but also by all those who knew him and came across him, from schools to practitioners within social care, across the board. That position of trust and respect had been gained.
And that links in very well, doesn't it, to the foster carer role in respect of the accountability, in respect of the actions taken on a day-to-day basis, and obviously the need for clarity in respect of delegated role, because it was very clear that there was a blurring of those roles, placing foster carers in a perceived and actual position of control in respect of many aspects that would have warranted local authority involvement. Again, highlighting the very, very important relationship between the supervising social worker and the foster carer in providing robust, rigorous supervision, and also, of course, in turn, highlighting the need for the same level of rigour in respect of supervision of supervising social workers, and also the need for support. We understand that practitioners cannot safeguard unless they themselves feel safe and safeguarded. In respect of the reports of abuse and response, that's clearly very well detailed in the report. I think suffice to say that those discussions were not always held, which would have been the key to identifying whether the threshold had been met. And again, highlights the importance of recording decision making, including decisions for no further action, because by default, they are decisions in themselves. We'll go on now to look at the identified good practice. And clearly we've highlighted the early learning in respect of the fostering panel and the IRO service. Child Y, clearly, as Kathy alluded to earlier, we highlight the importance of peer friendships, those resilience factors, those well-being aspects in terms of friendships with young people, etc. The excellent pastoral care at school and the relationship with trusted adults, which in fact facilitated child-wide disclosure. Child X, as Kathy said earlier, valued the police support prior to the court and would have valued this following the court, particularly when we consider the outcome. So really important point there in respect of ongoing support for young people involved in criminal proceedings. Very good use of independence advocacy, and also presence at the local authority reviews. I think this is the next slide. And we were very, very pleased also that there was excellent pastoral care for Child X and Child Y during our review process. There was a very, very careful handling of those arrangements with preparation prior to our discussions and support following on from those sessions as well. And clearly there were other identified good practice in terms of the relationship school had with foster carer, health assessments were held regularly, etc. So it is important, obviously, to balance the positive good practice alongside the learning as well. If we go on then to the learning, which is the next slide, the importance of good relationships with trusted adults in reducing barriers to reporting. And when we consider, obviously, the vulnerability of the child looked after and the barriers to disclosure, this is absolutely critical. The potency of narratives, as we've said, is an absolute central theme. It was interesting in respect of Child X and education that there had been incidents which perhaps had not been identified as bullying. And we felt that there was an opportunity here to use the virtual school model in raising awareness of the education department's responsibility towards children looked after, as highlighted in the Keeping Learners Safe. Again, in respect of the care planning and service delivery, it needed to be a needs-led rather than a resource-led approach to placements, which takes into account the care and support needs of all children in placements and clearly any known risks. We're all mindful that there are unknown risks, but clearly when there are known risks, those need to be reflected in amended, updated safe care plans and obviously in risk assessments. If we go on to the next slide, in terms of the learning in respect of the continuing suitability of foster carers as persons in a position of trust should be fully informed with very, very clear, robust, rigorous processes for reviews of suitability held following concerns or allegations. We found, didn't we, Kathy, that if incidents were not identified as concerns or as complaints or as allegations, then clearly that didn't trigger the mechanisms in place. We felt that there was no need for any further policies or procedures. They're there. It's just the identifying and the responding to those in the correct way. Absolutely. Also, that there should be very, very clear recording in respect of chronology of any concerns, complaints, allegations, and that they should not obviously be looked at in a vacuum. We felt that there had been opportunities to have viewed things as cumulative concerns, which may perhaps in themselves not have led to direct consideration of thresholds, but together, clearly they would at least have highlighted the need to consider ongoing suitability. And that was interesting also in terms of the learning and development framework, that there had been identified training needs for foster carers there, including use of technology. And we felt that they had been identified, however, that they had not been addressed. And I think also, Kathy, you've obviously done a lot of work around the person in the position of trust. And I think it was an interesting finding, wasn't it, that the concept of disguised compliance can apply.
Very interesting, very
Yeah,
interesting. And again, we heard routinely from those who contributed to the review around how this foster care was held in high regard. We've touched upon that. People were in awe of his ability to just do everything. So a model foster carer in many respects, and that was kind of terminology that we heard in the learning review. Somebody who was, engaged in all training courses, all their records were always updated. Somebody even mentioned that you would turn up at the house and this foster carer would be ironing all the clothes and everything was, it was a model foster carer. So again,
yeah,
on the surface, you can see that there would be no indicators, from looking at it purely from a compliance perspective.
yeah. So
Nothing of concern.
that's a really important factor, isn't it, really? The fact that we should be exercising that professional curiosity. And it is difficult because as practitioners, clearly, we don't want to think the unthinkable and believe the unbelievable and imagine the unimaginable. But at times, I think we do need that kind of critical friend supervision and peer support as well. This is an interesting observation. There were incidents when the police were involved with the household, and some of those incidents were conveyed, others weren't. And it did lead to recommendation 5, that where there was police involvement with a foster carer or a member of a fostering household, then that should lead to the sharing of information, because there were opportunities perhaps to have better informed the consideration of thresholds. I think ultimately that the learning was that nobody can guarantee, zero risk cannot be realised, but there can be steps taken to minimise that risk. And what follows in the next few slides are the good practice checklists. We're not going to go through these in any great detail. They're there for your reference. And we do feel that these do provide a checklist in terms of minimising, or at least in earlier and more timely identification of any concerns. So that slide is in respect of the child. The next one is in respect of children's services. The next one is in respect of matching and placement. The next one is in respect of the fostering service. And the last one is in respect of the foster carer. I think it's important to say that whilst many of the recommendations apply directly to the fostering service, then clearly there is a role also for children's services and clearly other multi-agency colleagues in this regard. We'll look briefly at the recommendations. Again, they're there for your reference. Clearly, the first one is in respect of reviewing those very, very important fostering processes, all aspects almost, particularly in respect of the foster carer supervision, record keeping, the management of allegations against foster carers, the placement planning and matching processes, again highlighting the need for very good liaison and shared understanding, shared approach, joint working with childcare colleagues, and again the annual review process. Recommendation 2 on the next slide is in respect of those safe care plans, those foster care agreements, and the delegated authority agreements. Again, absolutely critical in monitoring and reviewing. Recommendation 3, and this is again has been a central theme, the child's voice in fostering processes. Really important. Recommendation 4 is in respect of the multi-agency safeguarding training, including, of course, the triggers and thresholds, including the application to children looked after, and also, of course, those persons in a position of trust. And that is an interesting aspect, isn't it, Kathy, in terms of, perhaps, again, there's that assumption of safety that once a child, young person is looked after, that there isn't the need to consider the same thresholds, if you like.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we touched on that numerous times in the review. And I think you alluded to it right at the start of the presentation, isn't it? Is that, you know, the safeguards equally apply to children looked after. And I think sometimes there is this sense of safety that we kind of take for granted.
Yeah. Whereas in fact, because of the earlier vulnerability, we identified that there perhaps is more rigorous need, isn't there, to constantly apply that consideration of threshold. Recommendation 5 there, as you'll see, is the one in respect of the sharing of information between the police and social services when there has been involvement with a fostering household. So not limited. We understand, of course, that there are notification requirements for foster carers. However, this is providing more of an overview and extends that notification duty. If we go on to the next, I think just 3 slides, which are conclusions. And again, I think this, if there was one theme, this would be it, wouldn't it, Kathy, in terms of the sense of betrayal?
Yes, absolutely. No, and I think the the paragraph there, summarizes it perfectly. There was this overwhelming sense of betrayal, not only and very importantly to the young people who were affected by this, but by the network of foster carers and the practitioners who had put so much trust in him and had worked with him. They all were absolutely devastated
Yeah.
by the betrayal, and of course
it was
consideration
visible.
had to be given to how we support the foster carers in that network, who will, obviously be, like I've said, devastated at this betrayal, and it brings their whole profession into disrepute, which
Yes.
is not what they want.
No. And on just the next couple of slides, which will conclude our session, the legal duty to report a child at risk is relevant to a child looked after. Those thresholds need to be applied rigorously. There are identified practitioner and organisational blocks and barriers to identifying and responding to potential harm. However, if there are those clear, effective and robust systems across the whole sphere, then that is conducive to creating a safer environment and is conducive to making defensible and fully informed and timely judgments. Then I think the last slide, we did have a discussion in terms of, if these elements had been more rigorously applied, it might be, and it could be probable, that foster carer Adel said would not have been a registered foster carer by the time of Child-wise disclosure in 2020. And again, the purpose of a review is to identify lessons to be learned, not to attribute cause nor criticism. As we talked about earlier, very, very privileged vantage points looking back from a known outcome. And I think we have to conclude by thanking all the practitioners involved that we met. We have been given every cooperation, haven't we, Kathy? And also thank everyone for their excellent agency analyses, which was very, very helpful, wasn't it, when faced with a very complex case?
Absolutely not. I second that. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you all for joining, and we hope that you have found this to be helpful. Diolch.
Thank you.